So we have a press statement of everything I will have said today, except it's in French and I don't speak French, so we need to make sure I say it.
So, good morning. Good morning. You both understand French? English, sorry?
English,
yeah. That's great. Okay, great. Maybe I'll say a quick word about Yonatan. Yonatan is the director of Amnesty in Israel since 2011. Before that, he was the director of the Jerusalem Open House for Pride and Tolerance. He also worked as a director of communications for Greenpeace in the Mediterranean. He's born in New York and grew up in Tel Aviv. We thought it would be interesting to invite him as part of our campaign campaign, because we, as Amnesty International, have been releasing several reports on the conflicts, obviously in summer, the last summer. We've also reports on substantial violations, obviously by both sides. We've reports on torture by Hamas, obviously. This report, which came out last week, and we thought it would be interesting to have Yonatan speaking to us. This is part of a series of meetings. Yonatan will be meeting the Minister of Foreign Affairs this afternoon. He met with our members yesterday night, and with the Luxembourg members, and now he's meeting with you. So we're hoping this is useful for you. But I think I'll leave it there for the moment. Yeah, we also, maybe one last word. I was reading in the papers this morning about potential third intifada in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. So obviously your visit in that respect is quite timely. And I'll give you the word.
At least in the sense that I'm feeling very safe being here. Hi, thank you for joining me on this morning of many tax issues in the news. I'm sorry I won't have too much to say about that. Thank you for the introduction. It seems the common theme throughout my career working on nuclear disarmament in the Middle East, working on LGBT rights and pride in Jerusalem, and now Amnesty, which is kind of the etc. kind of altogether make me not very popular in my own country, but I wear it with pride. I've been with Amnesty for the last 3 years. We in Israel focus on many aspects of human rights violations that are taking place in Israel. This is in no particular order. We're working on human rights violations in the context of the occupation of the Palestinian territories. We work separately on the discrimination of Palestinian citizens of Israel. And we work on the rights of refugees and asylum seekers, of which there is a sizable community in Israel, and Israel is not following what it ought to be following according to the Refugee Treaty. A common denominator in all those, I find, is inherent structural issues in Israel's law and Israel's policy that all stem from one issue, which is Israel's self-definition as a Jewish and democratic state, which Amnesty does not comment on as such, but it is very much the context of a lot of our work, in the sense that Israeli governments often relate to that definition as an oxymoron, as two sides, two ends of a spectrum, being Jewish on one end, being democratic on another end, and now let's try and see where we need to balance between the two. Part of the issue is that Jewish is an ethnicity, it's religion, it's a great many things. It's not the same as saying French and democratic, because that it's Jewish itself is not a nationality. It's not saying, yeah, Israeli and democratic. It's saying Jewish and democratic. That means that within Israeli citizens there are gaps between ultimately the rights that Jewish citizens receive and those who are not Jewish. From that comes Israel's constant concern with demography, and from their stem a lot of the issues, the inequalities that Palestinian citizens of Israel face. From their stem a lot of the ideologies related to building settlements and Israel's conduct in the context of occupation. And from their stem Israel's fears related to refugees and asylum seekers. And we'll often hear from the government statements of this mass flood of people will come and threaten our viability as a Jewish state. And what Israel will mean by that is the demographic Jewish majority within Israel, and the notion that if there is no such majority, then it will no longer be Jewish. It would, they would sometimes say, it would be less democratic. Yet we see a democratic system where there are more rights to some. So that is kind of the background to a lot of our work, a lot of the changes that we try to achieve in the work of our section. During this last conflict, we had a little bit of a unique privilege. We consistently have a little bit of a unique privilege in the amnesty world, in the sense that usually when a country or area has the volume of human rights violations that Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories have, usually that will come with the lack of democracy or lack of freedom of speech enabling an amnesty section to exist to begin with. And so our section is a little bit of crossroads within our movement, in both, on the one hand, an ability to exist, but on the other hand, an immense priority in the particular issues that we work on, and the volume and scale of human rights violations that we face. And so during this last conflict, we were on the ground on the Israeli side. Israel did not allow Amnesty to enter Gaza, unfortunately, for the past 2 years, including during the conflict. And so we were a group of people, many Israelis, some Palestinians, some Jewish, and many international partners as well that were with us, facing a reality in which in our office there 3 times a day on average there's a siren, and we all need to vacate to a safe space and work to help resolve this conflict. And our work divided into a few different areas. One was directly related to the conflict, documenting human rights violations on the Israeli side of the conflict, while other partners within Amnesty were focusing on the toll on the Gazan side. We documented, we know of 6 civilian casualties in total on the Israeli side, 4,000 indiscriminate, over 4,000 indiscriminate rockets fired towards Israel, each of which is inherently a war crime, as it's a type of weapon that cannot be aimed specifically towards military targets, and therefore each of them are targeting civilian population. A lot of our work also focused on the other campaign areas, with specific consideration of the fact that Israel will often like to get things done when attention is elsewhere. So, for example, on the issue of refugees, we needed to take careful care to see that the situation for them doesn't deteriorate while international focus is on the conflict. It was particularly difficult to be a Palestinian citizen of Israel during this conflict, as there were a lot of demonstrations in the context of the conflict, and Palestinian citizens of Israel are not awarded the same level of freedom of speech as, say, I am as a Jewish Israeli living in Tel Aviv. So, while I am able to go out to the street and demonstrate in relative ease and security by the police, we saw many demonstrations in East Jerusalem and in Palestinian communities in the north of Israel facing excessive use of force by Israeli police and inability to use their own freedom of expression. And so all this came to play during the conflict, in addition, of course, to the horrific reality on the ground in Gaza, where we know of over 1,500 casualties, many more wounded, 500 of those casualties children, 2/3 of them civilians, a horrific situation. Amnesty has worked through the last several conflicts. There have been 3 in the last 5 years. Between the first and the second, we did get a sense that Israel was perhaps not for the right reasons of an actual respect for the sanctity of human life, but at least a better understanding of international law and international scrutiny. We did see in the second round a seemingly bigger consideration for humanitarian law that kind of got lost in this last conflict. So once again we saw an immense toll to civilian population in Gaza. In this latest report we talk about 8 cases of targeting civilian homes, civilian buildings. In some of them we did identify a possible military target, in which case the issue is an immense excessive use of force. In other cases there was no military target. We were able to confirm there was none, in which case it is an overt apparent war crime. In both cases of those two, we are calling for accountability. We're calling for the International Criminal Court to be brought in through the UN Security Council and to begin an investigation into these potential war crimes, as well as war crimes conducted by the Palestinian armed groups. This is where Luxembourg comes in as a member of the UN Security Council. I think Luxembourg is in a unique position to be able to do more to get accountability for these situations, to get justice for the many, many people who were killed, for the families that were wiped out during this last conflict. My hope for the future, I talked about Jewish and democratic. I think my role within society, being myself a Jewish person, I don't see Judaism as one that necessarily contradicts democracy. It doesn't need to be an oxymoron. I think Israel calls itself the only democracy in the Middle East, and the Prime Minister will often say to critics, why don't you go to Saudi Arabia and talk about human rights there? First of all, Amnesty does. We do work consistently throughout the region and throughout the world. But within Israel, my expectation is that Israel holds itself to higher standards than that, holds human life to a higher standard than that. That is what my own Judaism tells me. That's what my humanism tells me. I think anyone who has a respect for human life, for human rights, should not see any difference in human life between the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, as seemed to be very evident in the rhetoric during this last conflict. And my hope is that the two terms can coincide in a way where there is a higher respect for human rights. That's
great. Thanks a lot.
Introduction.
would you like to ask any questions?
Is the opposition heard by the Israeli government? Do you have power to make things change, or do they say Amnesty they are crazy and we don't care about them?
Yes. Yes, they say Amnesty is crazy and they don't care about them, but I don't entirely believe that. I think we have a very populist government. A lot of the things the Prime Minister says are as believable as his hair. I think there is a concern for the increased isolation that Israel is currently facing around the world. And within that, Amnesty is a player. Here I am today talking with you about more that the Luxembourgish government can do to better the situation. And I'm saying that on behalf of Israeli civil society. We're going to do our best to keep our government to standard, but we can't do it alone. We need the help of the international community. And that is something that Israel cares about. It doesn't want to be isolated. It doesn't want boycott. It doesn't want any series of sanctions or of worsening of relationships that have been going on over the past years, and in the past year in particular. So, yes, I think that ultimately can better the situation on the ground.
What's your opinion about the statement that there could be a third intifada now? Maybe you could give your personal opinion about it. Do you see that coming too? Or is it more like, I don't know, something for the medias?
I don't know that there's necessarily a uniform standard for what constitutes an intifada or not. I think that's more in the realm of public discourse, when the level of violence and counter-violence and the vicious cycle that is created around that, people start referring to it as an intifada. What I'm very worried about is the level of rhetoric right now, which is as well as the level of action, but rhetoric that is fueling the fire instead of lowering the flames. One example, just yesterday, the former police commissioner stated that in light of 3 separate incidences of a terror attack by car, cars driving into groups of people, and the drivers being East Jerusalem residents, so Israel must ban driving to all East Jerusalem residents. In addition, of course, to that being collective punishment, which is a blatant disregard for human rights standards, I see that as counterproductive in lowering the flames. I think there should be a lot more consideration. There should be a government focused on healing rather than on inciting, as we're seeing now. The current Minister of Homeland Security said just a couple of days ago, every terrorist should be shot on the spot. Now, in globally the realm of security and human rights, indeed we talk about the ticking bomb, someone who's strapped with dynamite and the ability to preserve the security of the people surrounding that person. Is it okay or not to shoot them? That's not the situation that is referred to in Israel a few days ago, when a Palestinian teenager was shot after tapping on a police car with the back of a knife and then running away and being shot in the back by the policeman, who was apparently safe within his vehicle. And being incited by his own Minister of Homeland Security to continue acting with that kind of excessive and brutal force. What we need right now is leadership focused on reducing the flames and healing.
Are you threatened in Israel because you are Amnesty director?
There are times when it's concerning.
Yeah.
During this last conflict, there was a lot of incitement against the human rights community and Amnesty International. Within that, in government rhetoric, which becomes often public rhetoric, being a human rights activist is synonymous with being a traitor. So there was consistent incitement against us, second only to the incitement against the Palestinian community within Israel in general. Being so, I guess life was even worse for our Palestinian staff who kind of wore both hats. It's difficult. At the same time, I have to say on a very personal level, when you live in such a reality, there's an immense feel of hopelessness. You know, what can I do about the situation? And being part of Amnesty to me was an amazing privilege, because I got to be part of something that can actually change. To what scale is, you know, constantly a question, but, you know, to wake up every morning, sometimes very early because of the siren, but with a sense of immense purpose. You know, I can go do something. I can mobilize a movement and get thousands of people from around the world to post pictures of their hands with the word stop in a great many languages in the context of stop targeting civilians, and posting that on the Twitter accounts of both Benjamin Netanyahu and Ismail Haniyeh. You know, that to me is a way of involvement, of getting more people involved, more people asking our government questions, more people asking their own government questions about what is our government doing to help the situation. So, as insecure as things sometimes feel, it's, I think, countered by this immense sense of purpose and ability to affect change.
This is some kind of provocation sometimes when you post on Benjamin Netanyahu Twitter account or so on. Is it understood?
Has the message come across? Time will tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think when people from Luxembourg and from Iceland and from Burkina Faso are posting their pictures on his Twitter account, you know, thousands of them. Yeah, I don't know that he reads them all personally, but yeah, it's people around the world saying we care.
Yeah.
And I think whenever we shine a light on atrocities such as these, they become better because global attention is there. And I think, yeah, such pictures on the leader's Twitter account reminds that leader that the world is watching. Sometimes perhaps as much or even more than when a diplomat is calling upset at what the government is doing.
Do you see the internet as an instrument to raise awareness, but also as an instrument, for example, to raise awareness of the politicians in Israel and Palestine, not just the citizens around the world?
Absolutely. I think the rise of internet and social networks have changed the dynamic of human rights work, what it means to act for human rights. If in Israel, Amnesty is celebrating its 50th year this year. And, you know, for a lot of time what Amnesty was doing was letter writing in a very classic, you know, I'm going to sit down with a pen and paper and write a letter to a government. That used to be the way people campaign, which was fantastic and was effective at the time. That is not the effective tool now. Now when many more people are able to just, you know, take their picture and post it on a leader's Twitter account, it means that many more people can take action. It means often access to communication channels in communities where there is otherwise harsh censorship of traditional media. And throughout the Middle East, we see those situations as in the many cases of uprising, social media was a key component of that, and human rights was a key component, I think, in the narrative of the uprising throughout the Middle East. And so absolutely, we see the less control governments have over media channels, and indeed, to a large extent, social media is more free of internet of government's influence than traditional media is, the more people can mobilize each other. At the same time, everyone knows that, not just the forces of good. So we do also need to be aware of social media as a tool for incitement and for populist narratives. And I think our next challenge as a human rights community is to see how we not just utilize these channels to get out our message, but also to decrease messages that are harmful and hateful. Okay.
Okay, Frank.
Do you want to add anything, or do you need any more information? You got our press release here. Virginie is at your disposal if you need anything else, like pictures or other reports. I think you inserted in the press release the links to the previous reports on Hamas violations.
Did I say more or less everything that it says that I said in the press release?
I think it was pretty consistent with the press release.
Good. EU, did we talk about EU?
No, you may want to say a word about that.
So it's the second thing that Luxembourg can be doing in addition to its role in the Security Council. Its upcoming presidency in the second half of 2015, I think, is another way for Luxembourg to be looking at the way it can better situations such as that in our country. I think every country that had a presidency, on the one hand it's an honorary thing, but I think countries are thinking about what will we do with our turn. I think this is an opportunity for Luxembourg to think what its legacy can be in its short time as EU president, and I hope that it will be a brief era of increased awareness of human rights, both towards regions such as ours, and indeed the EU is a major influential player. More attention can be given to the subject, as well as issues within Europe. The refugee situation, for example, which is present in our country, is also present here throughout Europe, and there's a big issue of burden sharing, lack thereof, by the southern European countries on the Mediterranean that are receiving a lot of the refugees and are not getting enough help from other European countries because of the Dublin Treaty. And perhaps that's another issue that during Luxembourg's presidency can be looked at, and to see how Europe as a whole can help deal with a situation that, quite frankly, is in part a result of a lack of international influence in the core issues leading people to be refugees to begin with. Situations in North Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in places like Sudan and Eritrea and others are largely due to lack of attention. No one is doing anything about the tyranny in Eritrea. No one is doing something about the mass killings in the Darfur and Nuba and other regions of Sudan. There's a lot more that could be done by European countries, by the international community, and in the absence of that action, there's going to be people fleeing for their lives, and right now many of them are drowning in the Mediterranean. Italy is doing its best with programs that it enacted to kind of save those boats. It's running out of money. It needs Europe's help to help take on this issue together.
about EU. What's your opinion about Sweden recognizing a Palestinian state?
Amnesty doesn't take a position on anything related to states, Israel's right to exist as such or not, Palestine's. We have no position on that directly. I know that the position comes from a place of caring for people, caring for human rights, a sense by Sweden that perhaps this step helps better the human rights situation on the ground for Palestinian people. And it's that care that I would very much like to encourage throughout Europe and throughout the world.
What's your next move in Europe? Do you go back to Israel or do you go somewhere else to...
Internal work. We have European directors meeting in Belgium that the Middle East, North Africa directors join. So we're going to be thinking a little bit as a movement of what our key focuses and challenges for the next periods will be.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you very much. You're welcome for the break from covering tax issues. Thanks for coming this morning.
Yeah, thank you.